Hello, hello, and welcome back to Soul Mastery. Have you ever wondered what energetics really means and what the power of energetics can do to help you unleash your story? Well, friends, today I have brought on a special guest and we're talking exactly about this. So come on, this is Soul Mastery. I am your host, Chaitali Desai, and let's drop into this. Danielle, I'm so excited to have you on. Before we get into our context, and everything that we want to share, I'd love for you to take 2 seconds and introduce yourself because I feel well, that's where the power is when people can hear you express yourself. So welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Chaitali. I really appreciate it, and I'm so grateful to be here today. I have a background in journalism and digital marketing. I have been a writer and editor for over 18 years. And for the last several years, I have been a book coach, a developmental editor, and a ghostwriter. And not only a ghostwriter, but I call myself the soul aligned ghostwriter because I use a combination of logic and soul searching spirituality to unleash powerful stories from transformative leaders. I work with C suite executives. I work with lots of various leaders who do not find that they have the time and energy it takes to write their book by themselves. I mainly work with nonfiction contents, but I have worked with folks who are writing novels as well. And that's a little bit about me.
Well, I love it because you sound very much like me and you come to your current role with like loads of knowledge, practical and the intangibles, like in the energetics of it, in the alignment. So I love that you call yourself the soul aligned because that is exactly what I love talking about. And I know my listeners hear me say this all the time, but your energy speaks way before the words that actually come out of your mouth, written or verbal. So let's start there for a second, because I think if we can really hone in on this understanding of the masculine feminine flow, it really lends to unleashing your story, right?
1,000%. I truly believe that we need that combination because if we don't give ourselves those concrete deadlines and benchmarks, it's difficult to know what that plan of action needs to look like in terms of how many words do I need to write on a daily basis to reach my goal of 30,000 words in X number of weeks or months. And we have to look at that perspective. Now, we also cannot force creativity and force that to come. So we have to give ourselves a little bit of leeway. And this is where I love talking with my clients. And now we can talk a little bit about this as well, about how your energy affects your creativity. And people don't put those two together very often, I find.
No.
And it's so interesting because if I have a client who says, oh, I just can't get this out of me, I have this writer's block, and I call writer's block the writer's mindset because it's all about where your mindset is. If you wake up and you eat a lot of sugar and you eat a lot of not so great foods for you that doesn't work well with your body, and you are not on a good circadian rhythm,
Oh,
sleep wise, then the next day, guess what? If you're supposed to sit down and write for 4 hours, what's going to come out? I want you to think about that. And these are the things that I talk with my clients about because sometimes that's what it takes. I have a memoir coaching client right now, and she was telling me she loves writing at night. Well, a memoir is very intense, especially one that she's writing due to trauma that she suffered as a young child. And she's writing some of these stories. If you're writing these stories at 11 p.m. right before you go to sleep, we talked about that and I said, I don't want you to write these stories and go to sleep right away. I want you to write these stories and I want you to give yourself some self care time. And self care deals with energy, which deals with creativity. And it's so interesting how we have to break that down, and it makes so much more sense, and you can be so much more productive if you know that your energy levels are high. Have you found that as well?
Yeah, and before we get into that, though, I want to just back up for a second. For listeners
Yeah.
who don't know what the circadian rhythm is, um, I just give you a brief example. So every night, if you're training your body to go to bed at 9:30, your body expects that and it helps regulate the nervous system. But if for some reason, maybe it's a Saturday night and you're out late, your body goes into a bit of like fight or flight kind of a situation, and it throws it off, so your system becomes dysregulated. So that just a little bit about that, because that's actually something that I recently started to delve into.
Mm.
So it, and to answer your question, Danielle, 100%. And it's funny because, society is just stepping into what they call, quote unquote, the woo. But really, it's, I don't know what the right word I want to use for it, but these energetic principles have been around since before time, or as long as time. And our ancestors, no matter where they were, cavemen or not, they lived by this. So it's almost like a reintroduction.
Mm.
And when you're explaining, because I understood a lot of what you were saying is the flow between masculine and feminine, the structure, the masculine, the feminine was the creative flow. But for someone who's coming to you and is like, these words, what, why are you having me talk about this? How are you helping lead them? Or what is a great example that you
Mm.
can share? Because I know that there are many listening who are curious, who are energetically curious, but they still, my explanation maybe doesn't land. So how would you explain it?
In terms of explaining, I like to, with somebody who is curious but doesn't quite know how to answer those questions or be in alignment with their highest energy levels, I actually like to pull oracle cards with them. And I also like to do meditations to see if any of their chakras are blocked. And I like to see that because what happens is if we're able to alleviate any tension or stress that any of their chakras are feeling and have in their body, then once their body is in alignment, their mind can also be allowed to be in alignment with their body. Once that happens, then we can have a broader conversation. Usually, the reason why somebody comes and says, I don't know how to write this, I don't know what to do, is either it's true, they have not made the time to do it themselves. I don't like the term I don't have time because I don't believe in that. I
Yeah.
believe we all have the same amount of time. But sometimes people do come to me and say, listen, I'm running a company. I do not have the time or capacity to learn how to write my book myself. And those are my ghostwriting clients.
Hmm.
And when that happens, they need to be fully in alignment with the interviews we're doing. So even if you're not writing the story, your energy needs to be there. So then I, as the ghostwriter, can authentically verbalize and write the story. So I ask a lot of pertinent questions. And
Hmm.
that's where my journalism training comes into play, where we talk through, okay, wait a second, you mentioned this term several times. So let's circle back to that. And a lot of times when we're talking about something that we think isn't important, it's actually one of the most important parts of the story. But it only comes to fruition when somebody is truly listening to what you're saying. A lot of my job is 90% of my job is listening and truly hearing my clients and what they want to say and asking them those correct questions so we can get their vulnerable stories out. It's almost like in an onion that, the onion layered
Mhm.
analogy, where there are lots of layers in the onion and we have to get to that core, right? And there are a lot of different ways to do that. And one of the ways is to sit and let you know if you're listening, that there are people like me who can help unleash that vulnerable story. That trust needs to be there and needs to be extended to all parties involved. Because if the trust isn't there, then the vulnerability won't be there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I actually wanna back up for a minute because for many people, they are not accustomed to being seen or heard at that level. So, I imagine at first you're dealing with that, I'm gonna say armor, because in this day and time of instant gratification and, even McDonald's will come and deliver via Uber Eats, there isn't that the personal connection is very different now, yeah?
Yes.
How are you walking through that? Because I don't think that you get to vulnerability before you address this. So what does that look like?
That makes a lot of sense. And I love that you said that, because I think it's so critical to know that you have this story inside yourself before you even ask for help. So if somebody comes to me and says, I feel like I have this story, a lot of times they are looking for somebody who is not going to give them simple instant gratification, because they're so used to that 95% of the time. So if somebody comes to me and says, well, I wrote this manuscript and I've had some friends look at it, and I've had my cousins, I've had, everybody under the sun look at it, but they're all loving, wonderful people in this person's life. And they don't want to hurt their feelings. They don't want to say anything that's going to rub them the wrong way. They'll say, oh, this is great. Great job. I love it. They're not necessarily going to give constructive feedback.
Mhm.
And that is something that I find people are looking for more and more, and craving almost, because and due to this instant gratification. We have TikTok videos, we have reels now. And if you can't prove your point on those social media sites in 15 to 20 seconds, then the person is going to move on to the next piece of content.
Actually, it's 3 seconds.
It's 3 seconds. There we
It's
go.
it's yeah, it's very intense in that space. But
Yes,
but when so we desire that connection. However, when we get the connection, it's a different story because I don't think we're used to it. So in order for you to get to that vulnerable spot though, how and I guess this isn't so much about your process, but from people who are from the listeners who are like, "Oh, this is interesting. How do I even step into removing this armor, this layer of, oh
mm,
my God, I'm being seen and being heard?" Because
mm,
it's actually one of our core desires as humans,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But when we get it, we're like, "Holy shit! Oh my God!" We kind of what's the word? We shrink.
yeah,
So, what does that look like? And again, it's not your proprietary process I'm asking about, but just in general for listeners
yeah,
who are like, "Oh my goodness, yes. I wanna start to be able to remove" maybe it's that top layer of the onion, one
yeah,
one layer at a time. So, in order to get to the vulnerability, though, it is this. So, I
yeah,
guess what I'm looking here for is the conversation around getting comfortable with vulnerability, right? Because that's a safety thing.
yes, it is. And a lot of times I find that top layer has a lot to do with the healing journey. I have worked with dozens and dozens of folks,
Mhm.
and some of which, in a book coaching capacity, they either change their mind about what they want to write about, or they are telling themselves that they are not at the right time. It's not the right time, or they aren't in the right mindset. That inner critic comes out even more to haunt us. So, what we can do is partially is dealing with confidence, and confidence in our stories, confidence in what we went through. If you haven't told somebody your story and you really, really want to say, wow, I think I have a really great book idea, then I would encourage you to journal at first about it and see what comes out, and see if you really want to help somebody who was in your position. What would you say to them? And then another exercise is, it sounds silly and a lot of people do this, but I think it can be very helpful, is what would you tell your younger self? And from you what you desired at that point in your life versus what you were going through, what you had. And that can help to open up those vulnerable layers in that onion, because really what we're after is, a lot of people will come to me and say, oh, I don't know if my story is worthwhile. And I have to tell you that the only people who have ever told me that are female. I have never had a male client come to me and tell me, or a potential client, and tell me, oh, I don't know if my story is worthwhile. The male
Oh, well,
client,
that speaks to so much of
yeah,
societal
tons.
conditioning, right?
Tons.
Um,
And
y
females are people pleasers. So we
yeah.
so I hear this constantly. I hear them say, "Oh, I don't know if they're going to like my story. I don't know if it's worth it. I just did a social media post not too long ago about the shoulds."
Mm.
And if people come to me and say, "Oh, people have told me I should write a book." Well, guess what? I had somebody come to me recently. They sent me the manuscript. I said, why don't you send it to me so I can kind of take a look and I can see what's needed, right? Because I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, you need a ghostwriter, or you need a coach, or you need an editor, when I have no idea what kind of shape the manuscript is in. It might be in a stage where you just need a proofreader, right? I don't know. So I'm not going to sell any of my services or any of my contractor services if I don't know what kind of shape it's in and I don't know what kind of writer this person is.
Mhm.
So this person comes to me, a really fascinating story, but, and I hate to use this word, but it was not an interesting story, even though it should have been, if that makes sense. The way that it was written was not made to be interesting to another party, because we talk about this in craft, in writing, that if you're reading books and you are seeing that the author is showing scenes, showing food at restaurants, you're experiencing what the characters are experiencing, that's showing. If we're just telling our stories and then this happened and then that happened and then this happened,
It's like
that's
devoid
fine
of
for,
emotion.
yeah, and that's fine for a first draft to get it on the page. That is totally fine. I encourage that, even if that is how you can get words on the page at first. But if that's the best that you can do, then it's either time to consider hiring a ghostwriter or learning craft. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up too is because I feel that when you're in that place that you can only tell your story and that's the most you can do, you are still going through your healing journey. And that is okay. But if you're going through the healing journey and you're trying to write about it at the exact same time, it's going to end up as a journal entry. It is not going to end up as a teaching memoir or a personal growth book. It's not going to do that. So I encourage everybody to who's listening to see, okay, am I in a place where I feel that I can truly write this to help another person? Or am I in a place where I'm crying every single time I journal about this one incident that happened in my life? And let me tell you, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's
Yeah.
about understanding and knowing where you are in your story journey. Because if you don't recognize that and think you're over here, closer to point B, but you're actually closer to point A, then it's going to wreck you in the long run and you will be disappointed. And I don't want that for anybody. I
Yeah.
want them to get to that point, of course, but we have to work to get there. And there are things that you can do to get there, of course. But recognition at first is, and acknowledging that recognition is so critical in this process.
And so, like for those that do come a bit devoid of that connection, because it almost feels like it's more cerebral than it is in the body at that point. Yeah, when it's
Yeah.
more of like so factual that it's dry.
Yes.
But you're able to support them energetically, isn't it? Like to
Yes.
kind of process, because the way it feels to me is it's more bullet point factual, because there's like blocks, there's a lack of awareness in a lot of the
Yes.
energetics behind it. So how do you help support them?
Yes. So there's a couple different ways. There's basically two tracks if somebody comes to me in that sense. One is I encourage all the authors that I speak to, even if I'm not working with them, to take craft classes. And there are several organizations that I encourage them to take. I'm actually starting an accountability group and will be doing some craft classes in this accountability group because I've been seeing this in the marketplace. And I'm very excited about that. So that's an option, of course. But there are a lot of wonderful organizations that have craft classes on everything under the sun, from character development to sensory detail, dialogue, pacing, you name it, they have it. And it's amazing now that you don't have to go to a university class and sit there and hear a professor talk about dialogue and you do writing exercises. You can do this in the space of your home because of all of these virtual classes that all these organizations offer now. So you can do this at your own pace, which is truly incredible that you have this at the tip of your fingers. And they don't cost a lot. A lot of them are under $100, and it's a really great way to improve your craft. That's if you want to spend the time and energy to improve your craft and understand how to do it yourself. Sometimes you need that, and or you need energy healing work. And energy healing work is a whole different ballgame because of the fact that you might still be going through this traumatic experience. A lot of times people come to me and say, well, I can't write my memoir because I'm still living my life. And it's such a misconception. And there's a little bit of a different, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I'll come back. And the reason that this is important is because we have to recognize that there are people who call themselves memoirists. There's somebody named Dani Shapiro, a very famous memoirist. She's written 8 or 9 memoirs. And you can write a memoir that is about a specific time period of your life. You can write a coming of age memoir from ages 5 to 15, 5 to 20. You can write a memoir about when you got a piece of mail and it changed the course of your life and what happened. There are a lot of various ways to write memoir and to write your nonfiction story. It does not have to encompass everything that you've ever experienced in your life. That is way too long of a book and nobody's going to read it.
I think that's really important that you shared that, because I'll be frank, I thought it was like from birth to the time,
Exactly.
we're gone or whatever. But I think that's really interesting. And I think what's cool about that is you get to experience moments or re-experience moments, as
Yeah.
it may be.
Yeah.
And even if they're still on that healing journey, it almost feels like that's a vehicle to use for their healing or to deepen the healing. Yeah.
Yes, 1,000%. And I think that when somebody is at the stage where some of my coaching clients are, where they are far enough removed, they have lived their lives, they have made something of themselves in the aftermath, and but they still remember a lot of these incidents that they experienced as a child or as a young adult, and they are ready to write about them. They know that they're ready. And the reason that they want to write, and this is really important as well, especially with memoir, but this also does apply to all nonfiction books, is you do not write a nonfiction book for you. You are writing a nonfiction book to help somebody else, to help your target readership understand a lesson, understand a main message that you want to portray in your memoir or personal growth or thought leadership or business book. And that message can be anything under the sun about your business, about life in general. That's okay. But if we are writing this from a place of, oh, I just need to write my story for me, it will come out as a journal entry. And again, there's nothing wrong with the journal entry. I love journaling. I highly recommend it. I think it's a great tool. But writing for yourself is different than writing for somebody else and knowing that your story is going to help somebody else. The successful clients I see and I have had are wanting their book published and out there, not just for themselves, but to help all of their clients and future clients. If we're talking about a personal growth or business book, if we're talking about a memoir, they want to share their story. They want to start non for profits. They already have non for profits, and they know that they can help even more people by writing a book, and it will land well with their target audience. That is what is critical in thinking about this journey. But again, they are far enough removed, and it doesn't have to be time wise, right?
No.
Because time, right,
Yeah.
it can be we can collapse time. It can be something that happened a year or two ago. It doesn't matter, but you have to be far enough removed, mentally speaking, mindset wise, that you are capable of writing your journey and knowing that you desperately want to help somebody else. It's not just for you.
What I love about this is that you're speaking in terms of a book, but for our listeners, I want you to really bring this down and think about your social media content. The same quote unquote rules apply. And when you do, you get to authentically stand in your power, in your vulnerability, and showcase, hey, this is what I walked through and here's what I learned. So I love that, Danielle, that you were able to share that and how to begin and to make that simple shift of or to ask yourself that simple question is this for me or is this for them? And really
Mm-hmm.
leaning into that.
Mm-hmm.
For people who want to get in touch with you, for our listeners who are like, "Ooh, I need more of this. This is too juicy to not step more into." How are we going to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, the soulalignedghostwriter.com. That's the soul, SOUL, aligned ghostwriter.com. And you can fill out my schedule a consultation form, and I will personally send you a text message, and we can chat about what your book idea is, what kind of support you're looking for. And again, I love doing this because my goal is to get the support that you need. I had somebody I was messaging with the other day, and they said, "Oh, thank you so much for messaging me. I actually have a coach right now and it's going really well." And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to hear that because I want everybody to get the support that they need, whether or not it's with me or a contractor of mine or somebody else. That's what matters to me." And you can also personally send me an email at Danielle at thesoulalignedghostwriter.com, and you can connect with me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, or on Facebook.
Awesome. And all of that will be in the show notes. Guys, I really want you to come back to this episode and step into it. Allow your vulnerability, that's your superpower, to start to emerge layer by layer. And I think it's going to be so powerful. And it is, I think you'll be surprised just what you have inside. So, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today. And I can't wait for this. For our listeners to really step into this new level of self-awareness, self-power, self-responsibility, all of it, and ultimately self-love, to walk through it with the compassion. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing all your goodness. I am so excited for all of this to come to light for our listeners, because the more we heal, the more we heal.
I loved
So
that. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
yes, thank you. And to our listeners, let us know what landed for you. Tag us on social media. We'd love to hear what you're walking through right now and how we can support you. And remember, we're wishing you a beautiful day, and it's time to rise.